Always trust.
We ask the question, what is needed in the world?
Beate Andrees, hello and welcome to the Al Jazeera Balkans channel. And thank you so much for taking time to speak to us. Now, allow me to begin by asking you, the ILO's World Employment and Social Outlook for 2024 highlights persistent inequalities and slow wage growth despite economic recovery. Now, in the Balkans and in the Eurasia region, what, in your view, are the most alarming labor market trends, and how is the ILO addressing them?
Well, first of all, thanks so much, Ron, for talking to us here today in Budva. Indeed, our figures, our latest statistics from 2024 show growing inequality, and it's to a large extent related to wage, the growing wage gap. Historically, productivity is linked to wage growth. What we see also in this region is a decoupling of productivity from wage growth. So yes, you have rising productivity, but wages don't rise in the same way. But overall, we actually have sluggish gains in Europe in terms of productivity growth. So the picture overall is could be much better. Then second, another topic we've been discussing here quite a lot is demographic change, aging societies. We see more and more economic sectors that really struggle to find the skilled labor they need. So that, of course, also has an impact. We see persistent inequalities, of course, between men and women in terms of the gender pay gap. And then another factor that has played really a role in recent years is the cost of living crisis because of the war in Ukraine and the inflation that came with it. And that, of course, has an effect on wage growth.
Which shows no signs of abating over the last recent months.
We do see signs of recovery in many countries, but of course it depends also on how the energy crisis will continue to be solved and addressed. That's a key factor. And as I just said, how much investments can be made so that productivity grows. And of course, we do believe that technological changes have a lot of potential here.
Speaking of technology, with AI and automation reshaping jobs, how is the ILO working with governments and employers alike to ensure a sort of a just transition that protects workers while embracing technological advancements?
Yeah, so that's, of course, the big question today.
Yeah.
Artificial intelligence is on everyone's mind, and it's already a reality in our jobs with ChatGPT and many other chat or AI bots that continue to emerge. In the ILO, we have, first of all, put a lot of emphasis now on research to really understand what is the impact of AI on the world of work, both in terms of positive gains that can be made in terms of job gains, job losses, but also in terms of, protection of labor rights. And what we see very initially, based on the research we've done so far, is that we expect AI to play more a role in terms of enhancement or what we say augmentation of jobs. So it's not the disappearance of jobs, but it's actually jobs change. The nature of occupations even will change. And so that's the first very important finding. Now, in certain occupations, like in clerical work, the automation could indeed replace quite a number of jobs. So that's where the negative impact could be probably more severe. And clerical work very often is women's work. Disproportionately, we have a higher representation of women in this sector. So AI clearly also has a gendered impact, and we need to address this carefully. But we also see potentially a positive role of AI in governing the labor market. For instance, in our latest research we have released last month on occupational safety and health at work, we really discuss these two sides. The positive side, what you can do to better monitor workplaces, to ensure, to also actually do away with jobs that are not good for our health, and replace them, automate them. But then on the other hand, of course, we have growing concerns in terms of mental health and so on that comes with technology. So I think we really need to look at these two sides, the positives, but also the negatives.
Right, but I mean, speaking of AI, what kind of jobs do you want AI to do for us? I mean, so far the way I see it, what my colleagues and the younger generation seems to be using AIs for the creative part of the human side, for writing articles, for creative stuff, designing stuff. Shouldn't we humans be, dealing with these more creative aspects of their day jobs, and shouldn't we allow AI to take care of more, to do the mundane tasks for us?
Well, indeed, that would be the ideal outcome, wouldn't it? And that's why this discussion now is so important, because it is humans that drive, these decisions where we use AI and what we want to replace by the machine and what not. And it needs a human dimension, or we call it a human-centered approach. If you take the example of the care economy, in some countries, robots are already used in the care economy, and there's good results. There are many tasks that are, it's not bad to automate them because they're very heavy or for other reasons. But then there's this element of care which hopefully will keep a human touch. So that to find that balance, same in the creative industry, is important. And also in sectors like mining or construction, where you have a lot of dangerous work, machines can help to reduce the number of occupational hazards. So that's really the positive dimension we see.
I came across various estimates that place more than 60% of the world's employed population in the informal economy. I'm not sure if this is a bit overstretched or not, but and I was wondering what you think about it, and what innovative policies can the ILO promote to sort of extend social protection and decent work to these vulnerable groups?
Yes, indeed. I mean, the number you are citing, Hoon, is really the global number. In Europe and Central Asia, informality is still a problem, but it's not as pervasive as in other parts of the world. We estimate it's around 16%, which is still significantly high. And it's particularly pervasive in sectors where you have, low-skilled labor, or where you use migrant labor. I mean, we've been discussing this here at the conference, where regulation is weak and where you also have a high degree of exploitation. Now, looking at the responses, it's obviously a priority for the ILO because it has a positive impact on in terms of economic growth, in terms of investments in social protection, etc. Overall, formalization has really positive benefits, also for enterprises, not just for workers. And what we see countries increasingly doing also here in this region is to digitalize services. So it's this whole discussion of e-governance. Digitalization has a positive impact in terms of transparency. People will know what are their rights, what are the benefits that pertain to them. For instance, if you lose your job, what are your unemployment benefits? If it's digitalized, much easier to access. Of course, there is the issue of privacy, protection of data, and so on. But overall, we see positive benefits in digitalizing government services. It has a positive impact also on formalization.
So you're talking about the Balkans and Eurasia region?
Yes, correct. The wider region. And another example is the formalization of enterprises through incentives, tax incentives, or access to financing, the credit system, and so on. That's a discussion, by the way, we're also having this week here in Montenegro with the key stakeholders from government, with the employers' organizations. We really think there's a lot we can do to help formalize enterprises, and that will have a positive impact on economic growth, but also justice.
I was wondering, when you speak to various government officials in the Balkan region, in the Central Asia and the Caucasus, do you see eye to eye with government officials? Do they understand what the ILO is striving to achieve?
They are our members.
Right.
They have signed up to our conventions.
They have.
And so that's the good news. They really come to the ILO because they see value in this international system of governance and standard setting. Now, of course, we have conventions on many issues pertaining to the world of work. And sometimes we don't see eye to eye in terms of the compliance, you know, whether the laws, the national laws are really compliant with the ILO's conventions. And for that purpose, we have an independent mechanism of supervision.
Understood.
So it's not me, it's really an independent mechanism, independent experts that review
to what extent member states comply with conventions.
Exactly. And then if there are gaps, we will provide technical support to, if governments request us, to close those gaps. And we have good stories to tell. I mean, for instance, to give one example, in Central Asia, we had long-standing issues with child labor and cotton picking.
Yep.
And it came through the supervisory system of the ILO, and we've worked together with governments and with workers and employers organizations to eliminate child labor or to address it. I mean, it's sometimes not quite finished business. We still have child labor in this region, but it's going down.
Now, speaking of child labor, I recently came across the global estimates on modern slavery, which seems to be showing rising numbers. And I was wondering, what can you, as the ILO, what strategies can you implement to combat these sorts of forced labor, particularly in high-risk sectors like agriculture and construction, which is quite dangerous, as we know, for many of the laborers.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, that's really the you know, as we call the dark side also of our economies, and it's obviously illicit. It's an illicit practice to use forced labor in all countries. All countries have prohibited forced labor many years ago. And it is striking that it still exists. And in our recent estimates, we say that there are 28 million men, women, children in forced labor globally, 50 million in modern slavery. That includes also forced marriage.
Okay.
So that's a bit of a separate discussion. So let's just focus in on forced labor. You know, we have a high number of victims of forced labor also in this region, more than 4 million, 4.7 million. So that's quite striking in a region that is so advanced economically. And it is exactly as I said, it's in sectors where regulation is weak, where you have a high degree of informality, where you have often migrant workers that sometimes are even, they come to those countries based on false promises. They are manipulated or deceived by,
various middlemen who work as
illicit intermediaries. So it's often a chain of exploitation that's very difficult to uncover and to address. But we have seen progress in terms of government responses, strengthened investment in labor inspection, awareness raising, also a lot of interesting discussion we are having now with private businesses that strengthen their own due diligence mechanisms to also make this an issue of business responsibility.
Now, in this region, of course, and elsewhere under your purview, youth unemployment is something we talk about on a weekly basis. It remains staggeringly high. I was wondering, I know that the ILO has been working a lot on these issues. What successful programs can be scaled up in a way, to bridge the skills gap and improve youth employability?
Yes, indeed. That's really an issue that's very close to our heart. The high numbers of youth unemployment we have seen in many European countries over the years. But again, here's also a good story to tell. These numbers have come down in many countries. Yes. We are now overall in the region at 13%. That's still high.
But still relatively good compared to how it was.
Exactly, and the trend is going in the right direction. That's the important message here. And why? We believe that a very important policy instrument was actually introduced by the European Union years ago, the Youth Guarantee. The youth guarantees address young people that are neither in employment nor in education or training. So it really looks at the whole picture and offers young people the chance, the guarantee to access either one of those, training, education or employment, and really helps young people to transition from school to work. And that has played a major role. That link also, to have government acting proactively, not just waiting for young people to find a job, but really approaching them, integrating them into the services of national employment offices, for example, and other means. So we really think that the youth guarantees has been an effective policy tool, and we will continue working on it, of course, here in the Balkan countries as well.
You know what's interesting? Most of these countries that you cover, the Balkans, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia, during the communist period, women at quite an early stage received equal voting rights and full education and almost equal wage pays compared to their male counterparts. However, since the collapse of communism and the chaos of the transitional period, there was quite a bit of backsliding in these issues. And even today, women continue to face significant wage gaps and are, of course, underrepresented in various leadership roles. And I was wondering, what exactly can international organizations such as yours do to advance gender-responsive policies and in a way to empower further and educate women in these fields?
Well, thank you very much for that question. It's also very important. And by the way, one thing we've discussed here also today at this conference is, when you have a situation of labor shortage, it's not just the solution, it's just not just migration.
Yes.
It's actually activating the labor force we have.
Exactly.
And young people, we talked already about it, but women is another,
a huge potential which hasn't been used.
Absolutely, a huge potential. So we tackle it together with the governments and with employers, organization, workers. Really have the private sector as well and have trade unions involved as well from different perspectives. So one is what you already mentioned, addressing the wage gap. That closing the wage gap will make it more attractive for women to join the labor force rather than dropping out of it. We see a positive trend overall. I mean, the latest estimate is 19% globally. It's going down, but we have to be careful and we have to watch that there's no backsliding. So that's the first thing. We have a global coalition on equal pay, and many countries of this region also joined that coalition. So there's really political momentum behind equal pay for work of equal value, as we call it. Another important policy tool in this toolbox is the care economy. First of all, we think that a lot of jobs can be created in the care economy. And that's, of course, positive, and it will contribute to economic growth, and it will also contribute to enhanced female labor force participation. And we have, just to give you one example, in Moldova, Ukraine, we have very good experience working with governments and employers organizations, investing in childcare, and we can see the positive impact already with more women entering the labor market.
Now, what is interesting about this region is that back in 2015, 2016, the Balkans was a transit route for migrant workers making their way towards Western Europe. Over the last 1 or 2 years, the Balkans is becoming a destination. We see workers from Nepal, from Bangladesh, from the Philippines, from India, working in the hospitality sector in Montenegro, in Bosnia, in all the way. I came across them in Venice, in Istra, in Croatia. However, they still face quite a bit of exploitation and, of course, exclusion. And I was wondering, there are laws and regulations which exist. However, I'm not sure to what extent they're being applied to foreign workers. And what more can be done to ensure, fair recruitment practices and rule of law?
Well, I think we are here at the beginning of a very interesting process. Yeah. It's we see that the page is turning, and that requires, of course, also a shift in policies. And the fact that we had all those countries coming together here today is a strong signal that there is a political awakening that this is now required. Yeah. And we will continue working with those governments together, also with our partners, to support that policy shift. And it does include first sort of this labor market analysis, as I said earlier, to understand where are the shortages, what are the skills needed, what can you do domestically, and where do you need international migrants to come in. It needs a governed framework where the employers and the workers sit at the table, and that can also be part of those discussions, of the quotas of work permits as we heard this morning. But then you also need to invest in in legislation to enhance protection where there are gaps. I mean, generally, as I also said, in terms of our fundamental conventions, we've seen good progress in laws being now strengthened and to ensure compliance with our standards. But more can be done, in particular on the recruitment side, as you mentioned, and also, very practically speaking, strengthening labor inspection service. That seems to, for me, seems to be a priority now. And to really enhance their capacities to focus on sectors where the violations or the exploitation is more likely to occur. So they have this risk-based approach on.
Should inspections come from local government officials, or can the ILO send its own inspectors on the field?
Well, that we would really want to leave to the governments.
Okay.
We want to empower governments to do it. And we have seen that it works. We do facilitate, for instance, contacts between governments from countries also in Western Europe and other countries to exchange and to see what are good practices. So that's the work we do. But the actual inspection, it's a government
Understood.
task.
Now, of course, trade unions, are they a thing of the past? Do we still need them? And in countries where there may be some sort of undemocratic regimes, how do you navigate the sensitivities between, promoting social dialogue, and protecting workers' rights and being politically correct?
Look, the ILO standards are very clear on this. From our conventions on freedom of association and collective bargaining and on tripartite consultations, they really set clear criteria of what we would consider a representative workers' or employers' organization. It has to be representative, as I just said, but it also has to be independent and democratically governed. For us, workers' organizations, trade unions, employers' organizations, they're a key player in a democratic system. And of course, sometimes that is a pathway. It's not happening overnight, and there are different interests that that need to be navigated. That's very sure. But in terms of the standards, the criteria, the universal criteria, have been agreed many decades ago, and they remain as valid today as they were at the time when they were adopted.
Mm-hmm. And as we move towards the end of our interview, allow me for two more questions. So we have increasing scrutiny of international supply chains. And how do you ensure that businesses comply with international labor standards, particularly when it comes to textile and mining?
Yes, I mean, that, as I said earlier, I mean, the discussion about due diligence, like what can business do in addition to what governments have to do? I mean, just to be very clear, governments have to comply with the ILO's convention.
Yes.
So it's their primary obligation to ensure that ILO standards are adhered to. And yes, in particular in the textile industry, garment industry, or in construction, where you have a lot of manual labor still, and often low-skilled labor, we see often violations of ILO standards, including our fundamental standards. So businesses have taken a lot of initiatives in recent years. So in the garment sector, for instance, we have this Better Work program in the ILO, which is actually a monitoring program. It really includes factory monitoring, and businesses that sign up to this program agree to really comply with the ILO's labor standards. So it's a very rigorous program. And by the way, what we've seen actually, that those companies that agree to join the Better Work and to adhere to the standards have been very competitive. So it's not, you don't lose your competitive edge. You actually become more productive in the, and countries that export garments have actually gained access to more markets. So it's a positive contribution. And in construction, we also see a lot of companies now taking steps, for instance, on ensuring fair recruitment of migrant workers in the construction industry. And we applaud those measures. We applaud this commitment.
Right. And finally, when you look ahead, what would be the top 3 priorities, if you could choose them, for the ILO in the Balkans and Eurasia region? And how would you mobilize stakeholders to help you achieve them? If you look at, let's say, the next 10 years or so.
It's the big transitions, right? I mean,
Right.
what we already discussed,
about
digital,
digital,
it really needs a whole of government approach, but workers and employers organizations, of course, have to be at the forefront of this together with governments. That's one. Another area which we have not yet discussed or haven't touched on, but it's really a big topic, is the green transition as well. You know, with some of the energy sectors that will shift in this region. So that also needs a collective approach. And it's not just labor ministries, of course, it's first and foremost environmental ministries or economic or whatever the government structure is. But labor has to be part of this discussion to ensure what we call a just transition. And then the other big challenge, what we discussed here is the demographic change. I think those big transitions, to navigate them, in a very fragile geopolitical context, I think that is a challenge for all policymakers in this region.
Right, Beate, it was such a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much once again for your time.
Thank you so much, Haroon. Pleasure as well.
Always trust. We ask the question, what is needed in the world? Is that going to be